Today, I bring you part two of my series on the National System of Political Economy by Friedrich List. For this episode, we will be looking at part two of the book, which goes over his theory. So, to start with, we have the concept of political and cosmopolitical economy. Political economy is defined as that science which limits its teachings to the inquiry how a given nation can obtain prosperity. We then have cosmopolitical economy, that science which teaches how the entire human race may attain prosperity. The former is what List claims to practice, and the latter is what he accuses the classical school of practicing. List is responding to Jean-Baptiste Say's categorization of the economy into three spheres: that of the private economy, the family; the public economy, the nation; and political economy, the human race. Cosmopolitical economy is flawed because it assumes a state of things which isn't true. A union of nations engaged in perpetual peace and trade. The world consists of stronger and weaker economies, with the former attempting to dominate the latter. Only in a world of equally civilized and developed states could universal free trade be good. Next, we have the theory of the powers of production and the theory of values. The former is a state with agricultural and manufacturing power will be wealthier than a purely agricultural state, and in contrast, the theory of value is only physical goods have any value. List argues that the causes of wealth are different from wealth itself. It's better to produce wealth than simply have it as will ebb away if not replenished. Adam Smith made an important contribution with his idea of the division of labour. However, he focuses too much on the theory of value. List is critical of the theory of value, and this is twofold. Firstly, that it purely looks at the value of exchange and not productive power. Secondly, it ignores what List terms as mental producers, such as a judge or an administrator. A nation may lose value through protective measures and manufacturing goods when it may be cheaper to import. However, she gains productive power instead, which is far more valuable. Next, we have the Confederation of National Productive Forces. So List argues that the concept of the division of labour does not go far enough, and he proposes a division of different commercial operations between several individuals and confederation or union of various energies, intelligences, and powers on behalf of a common production, or in the shorthand, the Confederation of National Productive Forces. So all parties involved in the production must be in the same area, i.e. the nation. If they're separated across different nations, production can become disrupted through interruptions such as war. Classical economists are flawed as they apply their analysis to a single firm and not the whole national economy. If a nation is self-sufficient in agricultural power, it should divert workers away from agriculture and develop manufacturing. The two have a reciprocal relationship, for as one grows, the other will as well. There should be a harmony of productive powers. This is achieved by a nation having a balanced mix of different types of labour. A nation will have to rely on the international division of labour for things it can't produce itself. We then have private economy and national economy. List asserts that there must be a national union of powers, or a cooperation between individuals and the state. Classical economists are flawed as they mistake private economy for national economy. The former cannot guarantee long-term prosperity or security. A nation sometimes has to enact commercial restrictions for the national interest, for example, not allowing someone to sell arms to an enemy country during wartime. Such interventions are not repressive, and List largely believes that private individuals can do what they want with their own money. A nation has to regulate its own economy to prevent negative influence from other nations' trade. Private economy favours the accumulation of wealth, whilst national economy favours productive power. Trade should be conducted between nations on the basis that they are working for their own national interest. Furthermore, next we have nationality and the economy of the nation. Nations are either weak or strong. Politics should civilize, while a national economy should develop a nation so it can be admitted into a universal society. A nation should have a common language, otherwise it will have a crippled literature and institutions. Small nations will have to rely on larger nations for protection, and their economy won't be fully national. A country that is landlocked or doesn't have a control over its waterways will fall under economic influence of another nation. A nation with no natural boundaries will be open to attack and won't be able to enforce a tariff system. A nation can overcome territorial deficiency through succession, purchase, conquest, or free convention. For the German Zollverein to be effective, it must include all of Germany, as well as the Netherlands and Denmark. Belgium must join with one of her neighbours to become prosperous in the long term. Canada will seek union with America in time. There are 5 stages of economic development: original barbarism, pastoral condition, agricultural condition, agricultural manufacturing condition, and finally the agricultural manufacturing commercial condition. An agricultural nation is at a disadvantage against an agricultural manufacturing nation. We then come to natural and political productive powers of the nation. In a nation state, the economy of the state is in union with the economy of the people. In a state where only part of the nation is present, then the two are not in union. Agriculturalists only associate with the local people. Manufacturers have to deal with people all over a nation and are far more energetic. Manufacturers have a great reliance on mental ability, and work has greater complexity and variety. Manufacturing requires promotion of science and education. Agriculture may become as refined as manufacturing if under the latter's influence. A purely agricultural state is medieval and oppressive. Manufacturing leads to liberty and enlightenment. A nation should exploit its natural resources to increase manufacturing power. A nation should be ethnically homogeneous as is best for strength and intellect. Next, we have the manufacturing power and the instrumental powers of the nation. The classical school uses the term capital to refer to the material, social, and mental means of production. And to quote List directly, we will adopt the term capital, but distinguish between mental and material capital, between material, agricultural, and manufacturing, and commercial capital, between private and national capital. He then refutes an argument of Adam Smith's where the latter argues against the establishment of new industries, as it would lead to reduced income based on the value of exchange from trade. Though income would be reduced, the commercial capital, the nation would now be able to produce a new good for consumption and export, material capital. Commercial capital is an intermediary between mental and material, agricultural, and manufacturing capital. A hunter-gatherer has no need of commercial capital, as the first needs to acquire agricultural capital, which would then exchange for manufacturing capital via the commercial capital. Nations with agricultural and manufacturing power are wealthier and stronger than purely agricultural nations who are indebted to the former. We then come to the manufacturing power and the agricultural interest. Agriculture is the main beneficiary of domestic manufacturing, as it ensures a greater variety and quality of agricultural produce. Though an agricultural nation may have more land under its cultivation, a nation with both agricultural and manufacturing power utilizes the cultivated land more efficiently. As an example, England, a nation with agricultural and manufacturing power, has an average wheat production of 25 bushels, in contrast to Poland, a purely agricultural nation with an average wheat production of 9 bushels. The classical school argues that purely agricultural nations shouldn't establish manufacturers, as having more land under cultivation means more capital is invested in the land, which leads to larger rents. List argues this is ridiculous, as the benefits of manufacturing for agricultural will far outweigh any short-term costs. Then to quote him directly, that the whole English agricultural capital, with 3,311 millions, yields a gross income of 539 millions, consequently about 16%, while manufacturing and commercial capital, amounting to 218 millions, gives a good gross annual production of 259.5 millions, or 120%. The value of agricultural capital can only reach a high value with the introduction of the domestic manufacturing power, and all the risk is taken by the new manufacturing producers which are established. Next is the manufacturing power and commerce. Commerce must be subservient to agriculture and manufacturing, not vice versa. The classical school puts the needs of commerce first and sees the world as one indivisible republic of merchants. We must distinguish between the interest of an individual merchant and national commerce. Internal commerce, or the means to which a nation can move and exchange goods internally. Having good infrastructure in place leads to strong internal commerce. Nations with agricultural and manufacturing power have better internal commerce. External commerce cannot be relied upon due to restrictions on commerce and wars. Foreign powers will also focus on fulfilling their own needs first, and if they do export to your nation, you may become dependent on them. The torrid zone exports raw materials to the temperate zone, and the latter exports manufactured goods back. This is mutually beneficial as temperate countries receive the resources for their manufacturing, and the torrid countries can develop and civilize. Only manufacturing nations have a prosperous merchant marine, fisheries, and navigational capacities. Colonies are the highest means of development for our manufacturing naval power. Britain's extensive colonies are a result of her superior naval and manufacturing capabilities. Colonial nations can become truly independent if they develop manufacturing such as the United States. We then come to the manufacturing power and the instruments of circulation. Or in internal trade, the circulation of wealth stays within the country. In external trade, if there's an imbalance, say, between an agricultural and manufacturing nation, then wealth will flow to the manufacturing nation. This is particularly a problem of paper-based circulation, as opposed to precious metals due to the liquidity of the former. This causes volatile price fluctuations as the state needs to issue more money to prevent the money supply from falling too low. The flow of wealth into the manufacturing nation causes them to lower their prices of the manufactured exports to stay competitive and dominant. If a nation is not able to develop sufficient credit institutions to print money, then this can result in precious metals being exchanged, a concept List called the power of disposition. The United States must continue developing her industrial and commercial power against England, otherwise independence would be in vain. England's conquest of India was good for India, as they are now united and internal trade can prosper. Furthermore, we come to the manufacturing power and the principle of stability and continuity of work. It is much easier to expand and develop an existing industry than to establish a new one. Wars and tyrannical policies can destroy an already established industry, such as the Edict of Fontainebleau in France, which expelled the Huguenots. The most productive nations are those with hereditary rule, as they are less prone to instability. The printing press was revolutionary, as it allowed the passing of knowledge to a greater number of people. Trade skills were passed from father to son or acquired through a guild. Public works are created through communities working in and investing in over several generations. State credit would be used to lend money to communities for building, repaid back by the community over several generations. Manufacturing is very vulnerable to damage and interruptions in operations, as it requires greater capital investment and skill to develop and maintain. Man is productive not just because he produces, but because he incentivizes production and consumption. Artists and writers create products which are enjoyed by people. The people become productive to be able to consume the goods. In theory, production precedes consumption, but in reality, it's vice versa. We then come to customs duties as a chief means of establishing and protecting the internal manufacturing power. Customs duties are necessary to protect internal manufacturing power. However, they should not be placed on the importation of natural resources. During times of war, there is a reduction in trade, so commercial power is reduced. On the other hand, agricultural and manufacturing power increases. France maintained protectionism after the Napoleonic Wars, which allowed their industry to develop in contrast to other countries such as Germany and Russia. A country which wants to adjust its protective duties must do so gradually. Luxury industries have a good profit ratio, so are less dependent on protective duties and can incentivize smuggling. Specialized machines and tools should also have low duties until the time that domestic industry can be disestablished. And finally, we come to the custom system and the popular school. The classical school doesn't distinguish between natural and manufactured goods, as protective duties are bad for the trade of natural, and they assume it would also be bad for manufactured goods. The classical school wants to expand freedom of trade from the domestic nations to the whole world. Classical school's main critique of protective duties is that they incentivize smuggling. List acknowledges that this is bad. However, this is not worth the damage that can be caused through lack of protective duties. Adam Smith argued that there were only three reasons to enact protective duties: in retaliation, the defense of the nation, or as a means of equalization when a foreign nation's goods are taxed less. Jean-Baptiste Say rejects all three of these reasons but does acknowledge a fourth reason, that of when an industry is first established. List is critical of the principle of retaliation, that it is implied that duties will be dropped once the foreign power drops theirs. Retaliation is only justifiable when an economically weaker nation is trying to resist economic dominance by a larger one. List also states that Smith's second and third reasons are redundant, as if you're going to make those exceptions, you might as well adopt a more protective policy in general. List also refutes Say's exception, stating that the only applying the duties when an industry is first established isn't long enough and must be maintained for longer. The classical school cites Switzerland as an example of a prosperous nation which adopts free trade. List refutes this as Switzerland is an isolated landlocked nation which never engages in conflict. Not all nations can have the same advantages. Also, Switzerland has little to no agriculture and manufacturing, which would fail if they tried to develop further. The classical school also cites Spain as an example of a country adopting protective duties but suffering economically. List argues this was not due to the duties but rather due to tyrannical policies such as the actions of the Inquisition, the expulsion of the Moors and the Jews, and the lack of religious freedom and reform. The classical school also is opposed to commercial treaties. This counters by arguing that though the Methuen and Eden treaties were one-sided against Portugal and France, respectively, there was no reason a commercial treaty couldn't be drawn up as that was beneficial to both parties. Thank you all very much for listening. Part 3 will be coming out in the near future. Thank you all for watching, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe.